So grab your notes, make sure you're pausing, and let's get this done. Population growth right here. What we have is literally one word you have to write, and that is urbanization. That is it, urbanization. So here's what I want you to do. I want you to circle the word urban, and I want you to write out again, what does urban mean? City. Absolutely. If you said city, I'm with you. Now, on this chart you have urban right here, meaning city, and that's the blue. Now, blue is the little ones. Now, the little ones you can see are obviously growing. Whereas rural, what did rural mean? Remind me? That means country. If you didn't know that, write it down. Those are obviously going down. So people are moving away from the country and towards the city, according to the Census Bureau and the statistics of the United States. In 1870, there were 40 million in population. By 1900, it almost doubles to 72 million, or 76 million, I'm sorry. But look at the interesting part. There were 75% in 1870 living in rural, but that's down to 60%. 15% of the entire population has moved away from the rural and obviously towards the urban areas or city areas. Now, this slide right here, you don't have to write anything at all, but I want you to pause it and answer those three questions real quick. Now, I'm not going to give you the answers to these three questions, but I do want you to make sure you understand this. The change in the labor force follows where people are living. Obviously, where you live is where you work. You live in rural, you work in an agriculture job. You live in urban, you work industrial. Now, the very interesting aspect here is that professional workers are being factored into this. But I want you to understand that as crop prices decrease because people are moving away from the agriculture areas or the agrarian areas, new machinery and corrupt railroad forces are going to force many farmers out and looking for new jobs. Where do you go if you need a job? The city. So that's something to think about. Now, this is a pretty important slide, so I'm going to need you to pause it and get it down. Now, urban opportunities, which means city opportunities. Immigrants are going to settle in the cities. Now, remind me really quickly, okay? You have 2 immigration screening centers that we've talked about. One is outside of New York City. What was the immigration screening center outside New York City? European immigrants came through Ellis Island. So with that, I want you to make sure you understand that New York City is one of the leading places. Industrialization, the factories, the mass transportation or mass production is going to lead to urbanization and the growth of cities. Most immigrants settle in the cities because they have cheap housing and they can work in factory jobs. I need you to circle cheap housing. I'm going to give you a word out beside here. This might be on a quiz, so you might want to take a look at it. Arrow out beside cheap housing, and I need you to write the word tenement. 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 And tenements are your extremely cheap housing built in the cities, all wood, no plumbing, no electricity, and a lot of your immigrants will work factory jobs. Now, a lot of the times immigrants will try to assimilate or Americanize into culture. Sometimes they won't. We talked about the ethnic neighborhoods. We talked about the nativism that's going to rise up after that. But one thing I really find interesting is that a lot of schools start to pop up, voluntary schools, trying to teach citizenship skills to immigrants. English, American history, cooking, etiquette. And the communities are going to provide a lot of support to these immigrants in these cities. Now, urban living conditions, I just have some pictures here. Y'all don't have this slide, but I need to make sure you understand what I mean when I say the word tenement. There's that word right there, tenement. In the old rear tenement in the Roosevelt Street of New York City, you can see out beside this, tenements are made of wood. They have no plumbing. They do not look very structurally sound. And one thing I want you to imagine, they have no plumbing. So if you have to use the restroom here, it gets sometimes thrown onto the street. What's being sold on the street? Market goods. A little bit disgusting there. There's no plumbing, so laundry would have to be strung from street to street to street to street. And this is what a tenement would look like. Now, this picture right here, this one is definitely symbolic of how dirty it's going to be in these slum urban tenements, okay? Now the cities, pause this, get it down. By 1860, no American city could boast a million. That means none of them had a million, okay, by the time the Civil War started. 1860, circle that. Civil War started. Just 30 years later, New York, Chicago, and Philadelphia had all gone past the million-person mark, which means that you not only have what used to be, okay, a city with a little bit, but now you have a city with tons of people. More people means, and I want you to write this out beside this slide in capital letters, overcrowding. Overcrowding equals, getting this down, crime, sanitation issues, and just overall problems, okay? So cities in and of itself are going to provide opportunity, but they will come with some problems. Now, the opportunities come in the form of machine-made jobs, high wages, and they basically kind of add a little bit of vibrance to the life of the farm. They end the monotony of the farm. Now, these machine-made jobs, these are going to be your industrialized jobs. They're going to be the assembly line jobs sometimes. Some of them are going to be skilled, some of them are not going to be skilled. But what I want you to really get that is these people are starting to go towards the money. They're being pulled towards the cities because we need them to make money. You remember those push-pull factors. Now, the other slide I've got here, and this one's an important one, is opportunities for women. Okay, I need you to pause this, get it down. Now, the women aspect is because we've already talked about in 1848, there's a Seneca Falls Convention. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, they all want opportunities for women. So in the cities, there are more opportunities for women than on the farm. More educational opportunities, more job opportunities, school teaching, domestic service. I want you to right now circle that word domestic, please. What does it mean if something is domestic? Means it's of the home. So a domestic servant is going to be a housewife. It's going to be, or not a wife, I'm sorry, a houseworker, a maid, anything like that. But here's the other thing. You'll also notice here that it says women doctors. We're talking about lawyers, typists, telephone girls, journalists, social workers. It doesn't just mean menial jobs. Women are starting to ascend, and as they get higher paying jobs, they'll want more rights. And when they want more rights, what do you think they're going to want next? Suffrage. And remember, what is suffrage? Suffrage is the right to vote. Do women have the right to vote yet at the turn of the century? No. And remind me, this would be a good quiz question, see if you're listening, what amendment is going to be passed in 1919 to give them suffrage? The 19th Amendment. But that's still 20 years away, so don't get too excited. Okay, now, urban problems. Last page. Oh, almost went too far. Two biggest problems that we're going to have. Actually, there's four, but get this down. First one's going to be water. 1860s. Cities have inadequate or no piped waters. Indoor plumbing is extremely rare. By the 1870s, we will have some filtration, but it's only going to be in the rich neighborhood. Chlorination, or basically the cleansing of water, won't happen until after the turn of the century. And because there's no water, I'm going to be real honest with you. The first problem leads to the second problem. There's very bad sanitation. Manure, open gutters, factory smoke, poor trash collection. It's going to be extremely disgusting in these slums and in some of these cities. Contractors would be hired to sweep the streets, but unfortunately, a lot of the times they were going to be hired by political bosses, and political bosses would hire their friends and say, do it or don't do it, whatever, you'll get a paycheck. Nobody would collect garbage. Nobody would clean the outhouses, because remember, there's no plumbing. And by 1900, cities had to develop sewer lines and create sanitation departments. But from about 1865, end of the Civil War, to 1900, really, to be honest with you, there's no sanitation in this time period. And if you look at this picture right here, look at that. Imagine all of that with no water, no sanitation, and just overall overcrowding. It's going to get extremely dirty. Look at this picture. These are kids that are sleeping on the streets, and it's not the fact they're sleeping on the streets that worries me. Look at what they're sleeping in. That right there, manure, sanitation, they're using a barrel for a pillow. That's what our children are living in, and that's the good part of their life. The other part of their life, they're in a factory for 16 hours a day. Look at this. These are tenements right here. No water, no sanitation, no piped water. What's being thrown on these streets where this market is? It's pretty disgusting to think about. Now, there are two more issues that you have to get down. Okay? Crime. This is going to be due in large part due to overcrowding. You might want to pause this, get it down, but then after that, get crime and overcrowding. Now, as the population grows, thieves flourish. There's more competition for jobs, and so crime becomes more prevalent. Early police forces are too small to be effective, and again, if it's a political spot, political bosses oftentimes are corrupt in nature. So police forces are too small or they're corrupt. Fire hazards. Well, let's be honest. One of the other problems was there was no water. So how do you put a fire out? Remember, those tenements are made out of wood. They have no electricity, so they light kerosene or candles. That's a disaster waiting to happen. So most fires are going to be started in the slums. Most firefighters are volunteers. They're not always trained. They're not always available. And here's one thing that's interesting. This will tell me who's been watching the notes. Back in this time period, actually the firefighters from each division of the city actually would act as gangs, and they would fight each other. Sometimes when a house fire, a tenement fire would break out, the firefighters would arrive. They would fight each other to see who could fight the fire. And by the time they finished fighting each other, the tenement had burned to the ground. Fire sprinklers, all this stuff, none of this stuff was mandatory back then. Because remember, the government says, hands off, laissez what? No rules. So nobody was looking out for any of these people in these slums by saying, you have to have fire sprinklers. You can't build this many. There's building codes. There's this. You have to do this. There was no rules. So all of these monopolists or whoever was looking for money, they'd put up these crappy tenements. Then they'd let these people live in squalor and then just look the other way when they saw them. Some of these pictures, oh, that one always gets to me. By the way, those kids with their feet in the gutters, that's not a rain gutter. That's a sewage gutter. And that horse right there, it's not sleeping. Now, with that, the last slide of the notes is right here. Pause it, get it down. Now, the settlement house movement is going to be a progressive movement. I want you to write that out beside this slide. Progressive, meaning they want progress for the slums and the people in the slums, the immigrants. Social welfare reformers, remember, what does it mean to reform? To change it, to make it better, are trying to work to relieve urban poverty. This is going to be what we call the social gospel movement. Now, this right here in this picture kind of shows that Jesus helping someone up preaches that you can reach salvation or heaven through service to the poor. There's going to be one person in particular that we're going to look at, and it's a woman by the name of Jane Addams. Down here at the bottom, okay, what you wrote. She founded something called the Hull House. Circle her names, 2 D's. Jane Addams, and Hull House, which is a settlement house or a community center. Like, you know how we have like the Wesley in Amarillo or Victory Outreach or something like that. These are houses that help immigrants, and they're normally founded by college-educated women, and they provide educational, cultural, social services, nurses once a week. They might help people find jobs, watch kids, that kind of stuff like that. And their whole purpose is to help the immigrants pull themselves up out of the slums, assimilate to American society, and kind of help them out. And this is a picture of Jane Addams herself and the Hull House, which was, good quiz question, see if you watched this all the way to the end, okay? Hull House was in Chicago, and there's actually a couple pictures of it. 4 ways in which settlement houses could help the immigrants. Educational, nurses, financial problems. They would help them learn the money, learn everything. They basically were a philanthropic, which means philanthropist, remember that word, way to help immigrants. And they would literally help assimilate the immigrant population in hopes that they could pull themselves up. And by 1889, this one settlement house, the Hull House, changes to a movement, and by 1900, more than 400, this will tell me who has been watching to the end, 400 houses had been established in major cities. So Jane Addams was pretty impressive. End of the notes. Be ready for a quiz.